So I want to take you back about a year ago. Not all of you were here then, but it was almost a year ago today that I began one of the worst weeks of my entire life. Some of you may remember my identical twin sister, Regan. She went into Evergreen Hospital, which is a nice suburban hospital. She was supposed to be sort of a routine operation. She had a cyst that had gotten infected, a little fever. So she went in on a Monday, the 18th of May, had surgery Tuesday morning. They expected her to go home that afternoon, maybe Wednesday morning. But her white blood cell count, it just wouldn't go down, which meant there was still an infection somewhere. And her fever kept rising. By Thursday, the doctors were worried as it was getting worse and the MRI hadn't shown anything. I remember buying a ticket Thursday night thinking, I'm just gonna have a ticket just to make sure. I'm sure everything will be fine. I had, of course, that wonderful memorial service for our beloved Charlie Reed was that Saturday, and I thought, well, I'll make a reservation and leave after Saturday, after the service. And I'm sure, though, it'll be fine, get a fully refundable ticket, because everything will be okay. So there I am Friday evening, about 6:15, working on the service for Charlie. And they had a call from my brother-in-law, Lewis. And he says in a very shaky voice, he says, Regan has necrotic fasciitis. They're taking her to the ICU at Harborview Hospital. I don't even remember the Latin words, but I do remember ICU and Harborview Hospital. And I felt my stomach kind of drop. This is Harborview Hospital. It is the #1 trauma hospital for 4 states of Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and Idaho. You can see that there's helipads down there. It is the place where only the absolute worst cases go. I just knew in that moment I had to get to Seattle. I had to be there now, and I went into fix-it mode, right? Okay, so I've got to get somebody to do the service. I've got to get my dogs. I've got to pack. I've got to get this. All these things are running through my head as I do it. So I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to find a colleague. I knew that there were going to be 2 colleagues at the service because Charlie was so respected. But I didn't have the phone number of one of them, so I called Reverend Mitra, who's up at Long Beach, our minister up there, for the number. And she heard my voice that was about 5 octaves higher than normal. And she said, I'll be right there. And she and her girlfriend jumped in their car, and they came down. And she got online. She's trying to help find a flight for me. And as I was arranging for my neighbors, who were just wonderful angels, along with Mitra, to take my dogs, I was literally throwing things into my suitcase. I later found out I forgot underwear. Thank God I'm a twin. It was kind of amusing. I remember we raced up, Memorial Day weekend, we raced up to LAX. I begged my way through security. I ran down the causeway, and I made the 9:15 flight within 5 minutes to spare. I arrived finally after getting my luggage in a rental car at midnight, which is quite hard to do, by the way. I arrived at the hospital about 1:30 in the morning, where Lewis, my brother-in-law, explained to me what necrotic fasciitis was. It's a flesh-eating bacteria, and it's often fatal. The next few days are kind of this blur for me. I can't recall all of them in any order, but Lewis and I sort of alternated taking Max, my nephew, to school and picking him up while being at the hospital with Regan, which was about an hour away from where they lived. And we had to arrange for someone to walk my sister's 9-month-old puppy, Maple. I'll give you a nice, lovely picture. Here's Maple. She's a type of Newfie. She's a very big dog, very sweet. And this becomes important later. We had to make sure she was taken care of, and some of our wonderful neighbors, Julie and her 13-year-old daughter, Lily, came through. I didn't know them, but they'd heard about Regan and offered to help. And I remember all I wanted to do was be with my sister at the hospital. After about 2 days, the docs took Regan off of being intubated. She had the thing down her throat. They kept her that way because they knew that pretty much every day she was going to have to go in for surgery as they checked to make sure that there wasn't any more bacteria. She was on 3 different intravenous massive antibiotics. And each day they would test her white blood cell count, and it would still be up. And each day they would do another surgery on her. My poor sister was so exhausted. And Lewis and I felt like our souls were just being stretched to that breaking point. I remember one of her many, many different surgeons, they had all the different experts working on her. One of them said, I'm scared about what's happening. I didn't like that word. So he said, "Oh, you mean so you're concerned about our white blood cell count?" I remember he turned to me and he said, "No, I'm scared. We can't find what's wrong with her. And if we can't..." I've never wanted to slug anybody harder than in that moment. I think it was by about Thursday of that week when her white blood cell count started to go down, things were looking a little bit better. And Lewis and I had worked out our routine, but by then the stress had really gotten to me and I'd thrown out my back, okay? And I was pretty exhausted. And that evening, that Thursday evening, I had these horrible stomach cramps, and turned out that I had gotten, maybe, I don't know, some sympathy bug, bacterial infection of my own, and I had to stay home that Friday. That Friday I was at home, and I was miserable after an incredibly stressful week. I was terrified my sister was going to die. My back hurt, I had a fever. All I wanted to do was be with my sister at the hospital, but of course I couldn't. And I was feeling sort of this petty jealousy that Lewis got to be there. I remember Max was in the living room watching YouTube videos, and Maple the dog was crated up in the room across the hall. I truly don't think I've ever felt more miserable my entire life. And suddenly, I hear the most horrendous screaming coming from across the hall where Maple is. It sounds like a child's being tortured. I mean, it's absolutely horrible. And of course, the adrenaline hits me, and I stumble out of bed in my fevered state, and I run to find Maple frantically scratching at her crate. Something's wrong, I don't know what it is. And Max comes running, "What's wrong, what's wrong?" We're all in this, I'm kind of crazed, and I get the crate unhinged, and Maple bolts out the door, and I notice that there's some blood around, and Max, of course, who's 10 years old, he starts screaming, "There's blood, there's blood!" And Maple's skin had somehow gotten caught in the crate. I'm not entirely sure, but it had on her face, and it had created a laceration on it. She was very happy to be out of the crate. So there I stood. I'm feverish. I'm bent over from back pain. I've got a dog that's bleeding and a boy that's crying. There's no one around to help me. I'm physically, I'm emotionally, I'm spiritually, I am spent. I've got nothing left inside of me. I remember standing there trying to kind of kick myself into fix-it mode, because that's what I do in a crisis. But I just stood there thinking, I'm done. I can't do this. I'm done. I cannot do this. And that's when I heard a voice. And you can decide where that voice comes from. But it said, "Of course you can't. It is too much. You need help." Right, help. Okay, I don't have to do this alone. I thought about who I could call. Most of my friends were about an hour away. My sister lives about 45 minutes outside of Seattle. Now, Reagan had lots of neighbors, but I didn't have their phone numbers except for the one, Julie, and her daughter, Lily. So in desperation, I called her number, and you feel that feeling that you feel when you're asking for help of someone you barely know, right? Oh God, what am I gonna do? Will they be able to help me? I just don't know. And I remember her husband answered, and she wasn't home. Oh man. Again, I think he probably heard the panic in my voice, and he said, "Can I help?" I explained the situation to him. Before I could even finish, like Mitra, he said, "I'll be right there." And he came up and he took Maple to the emergency vet. His daughter went to play with Max, and I crawled back into bed. And thus pretty much ended the absolute worst week of my life. And as you all know, most of you know, Regan got progressively better. It took her another 3 weeks to leave the hospital, but by even that Monday, I was able to come back here. I have no doubt that many of you have experienced a horrible week or horrible time. Now, most of the time we go into that fix-it mode, we get through it. But there are those hard times when you get to that point of, please God, no more, I can't take it. There's nothing left in me. It's an absolutely horrible place to be. But if you're lucky, if you're really lucky, you have angels who show up to help you. When I look back on that time, I realized how incredibly lucky I was. Not only did I have friends and colleagues and family, neighbors I could rely on, but they all had the means, the time, the energy even to help me. And I also had the means. I had the resources to buy a ticket at the last minute. I had the savings. I could hire a rental car. I had a job that I knew that would support me, and you all were so fantastic. I can't imagine what that situation might have been like if I hadn't had all of that. What if I didn't have a savings account? What if I didn't know anybody in the area? What if my family, my friends, my colleagues didn't have the means or were somehow unable to drop everything to help me? What if I would lose my job if I had left? What if I hadn't had health insurance? Or what if my sister hadn't had health insurance? And I'm really lucky because I didn't have to face those questions. But some people do. I remember about a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, a gentleman came to church here one day. He had come to Orange County looking for work and didn't know anybody. He went through what cash he had pretty quickly. He was a carpenter, and his tools had got stolen out of his car. So he started sleeping in his car, unable to get work and having no money to replace the tools. His car broke down, it was an alternator, over at Vaughn's right over here. Security came to him and said, well, you can't stay here. And he's like, where do you go? What do you do? So he ended up parking his car here in our parking lot, and he came to church that Sunday. Some of you heard about his story and you introduced me to him, you brought him over to me. And of course, if you remember Joe, he wasn't somebody that you thought of as homeless. He looked very nice in khakis and a white shirt and everything. He asked if I knew of any work and told me about his car. Now I asked about how much it was the cost to repair because it was a busted alternator. I knew it couldn't be that much. And he sighed and he said, oh, it's about $160. I said, oh, okay, we can cover that. He was sort of stunned. Really? You'll do that? I remember his eyes filled up with tears. He couldn't believe it. Honestly, I was kind of shocked at his reaction. I mean, after all, coming up with $160 to repair my car, while it might be annoying, I might have to take it out of savings or something, isn't something that I really generally worry about. So we're pretty lucky, those of us who have these means, right? This power to handle those emergencies, to have what social scientists call a safety net. Remember Eve Garrow, who came here recently to speak to us about that people often who end up homeless, they just don't have a safety net. Do you have a safety net? What might it look like? I know that Regan, for example, is one of my safety nets. I know that if anything happened to me, I always have Regan. I've also got this church. I've got friends who would take me in. I have a savings account, a car that works, a home that I can live in, a retirement account. I don't really think about them that much. They're just sort of the things that you do and that you have. But these are safety nets. So I invite you to imagine the worst week of your life when you've gone through hell, or imagine what hell might be like. What were the safety nets that got you through? And what if you hadn't have had them? Having safety nets, real ones, is a kind of power. It's something we think about when we get caught up in our daily stressors. It means being able to take risks that others can't. It means being able to face small things like a busted alternator. You can face it with equanimity and ease. It means not being homeless if you can't find work right away. What is it like not to have a safety net, to be ill and to have no one to take care of you, no one to help, to lose your job, your home, and no place to go? Because you can't park your car anywhere because it's illegal. You can't sit on a park bench too long before you're kicked out. Can't get money to get a hotel, can't get a shower, but people will revile you for your smell and your appearance. You can't seem to get a foothold on getting a job or an apartment as you don't have a job or an address. I remember Joe saying something to me. He said, I was so desperate. Basically, I had said, if you wanted to come here and we have a shower in the main office, and he said if he wanted to use a shower, he would be welcome to do that. Joe said, I was so desperate, I thought about using your garden hose just to get clean. Think how desperate you have to be to bathe in a garden hose. As a society, we do have some things that help with it. We have Social Security, some welfare, but more often than not, these are not enough. Instead, we as a society, we make laws that make it illegal to park cars or sleep on benches. Anti-vagrancy laws make it poverty illegal. Some cities, they put down spikes where they know the homeless reside. They put down benches that people can't sleep on. My personal favorite is the bench over here with the spikes, but you can put a coin in and the spikes will go down. Yeah, what kind of society do we live in where homelessness is solved by spikes? Our choir sang, while we seek mirth and beauty and music light and gay, there are frail forms fainting at the door. Though their voices are silent, their pleading looks will say, oh, hard times, come again no more. Have mercy. We need mercy in the world. Mercy is a concept. It's not something we talk about. Shakespeare tells us it's an attribute of God. It's a holy attribute. Actually, it's something that's about power. It's when you have something that another person doesn't. Mercy is when we show compassion or forgiveness to someone who either deserves it or doesn't deserve it even. Mercy is unearned. It's an act of power. Mercy is using power with compassion. To have the ability to help others makes you powerful. But it's up to you, up to each one of us to take on that attribute of mercy. We are the angels of mercy. If we as a country, as a city, as a community want to end homelessness here, we have to cast our safety nets much wider. We have to be those safety nets for one another. Because it wasn't me actually who gave Joe that $160, right? It was all of you. Each of you gave of your hard-earned money. We pulled it together. We put it in this ministerial discretionary fund. It's a big long name for something as basically as mercy. We pulled it together so that we can give it away. That is an act of mercy. And I'm so grateful for all the ways that this congregation becomes a safety net for others. I've seen such incredible things. It's anything from showing up at a hospital to support someone. I've known some people here help people with Alzheimer's get into a home because they had no family. It's showing up to council meetings and speaking up at council meetings. Organizing Operation Stand Down that we had a couple weeks ago. And speakers. People showing up to help and listen. Because you see, we Unitarian Universalists, we come from a long line, this legacy of caring that Tendeka talked about. And sometimes when the world seems too much, we can remember one another, know that we're not alone in this struggle, and we can renew that legacy. Remember the innkeeper? To learn that the cycle of violence doesn't work, that alienation doesn't work. And yes, people are breaking laws. But what kind of society are we that lets children starve or shoves away the homeless, puts spikes in the road? We need a different way, the way of mercy and of kindness. We need to continue that legacy of caring. And I wish for all of you to have mercy and kindness to follow you all of your days. May it be so forever and ever. Amen.